opportunity to run out of the door. We are going to be given our talk, the final talk of the day, by Kevin Lindeberg. This is The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, the Heiner Affair. And for somebody who knows a little bit but not an awful lot, I'm actually quite looking forward to this myself. Kevin is a political cartoonist and caricaturist. He was educated at Maryborough Boys High School in Queensland and holds an associate diploma in industrial relations from Brisbane College of Advanced Education. Kevin is a former Queensland public sector trade union organiser who now works as a freelance political cartoonist, caricaturist, illustrator, while he continues his quest for justice in the Heiner Affair. He previously pursued a career as a musical comedy opera baritone singer in Brisbane, Sydney and London. And in Sydney he played the leading roles in Oklahoma and The Sentimental Bloke, and inter alia performed with the London Philharmonic Chorus under Maestro Riccardo Muti in London South Bank. He takes a great interest in criminal, administrative, constitutional law, record keeping and current affairs, and was, for a time in the early 70s, a public forum speaker on the Sydney Domain. Ladies and gentlemen, please join with me in welcoming Kevin Lindeberg to the stage.
I would like to acknowledge the Larrakia people, the traditional owners of the land on which we stand. Ladies and gentlemen, it might not be known, but in some legal circles, evidence required for judicial proceedings attracts the description of Clint Eastwood, the good, Lee Van Cleef, the bad, Eli Wallach, the ugly, in respect of its anticipated value for or against a defendant or plaintiff's position in a course of justice. But whatever its description, when known or reasonably anticipated to be relevant in judicial proceedings, evidence should never be destroyed and should remain accessible to be discovered or disclosed in the interest of the administration of justice. Unlike the weak sheriff in Eastwood's film, it is vital to have a strong, impartial sheriff standing for justice and right against the machinations of the good, the bad and the ugly. The role of archivists, record keepers, the impartial document sheriff, can become highly controversial and dangerous in an environment when and where attempts are made to arbitrarily override the principle of integrated government by the rule of law, especially when the fate of a government's continuing existence may depend on the information in the public record. The Good, the Bad and the Ugly, the third film in the Man with No Name trilogy, set in train a tradition of cruel drag 'em out, string 'em up and anything goes westerns, where the rule of law either didn't exist, was trampled on with impunity by those in positions of power, or rough justice meted out with callous indifference. These movies remind us that unless societies respect the rule of law, tyranny soon takes over. Once that happens, it cannot be easily restored without considerable struggle or sacrifice. Now, I submit that it is always this generation's duty to improve our system of government for those generations to come. No task should be too big or too small, too complex or hard, too unpleasant politically or professionally to confront. In all cases, no one should be above the law, and the law should apply equally in materially similar circumstances. It is the rule of law which keeps us free. Now, holding these principles in mind and holding in common the movie's document being the treasure map to the hidden gold in Sad Hill Cemetery, and the Heiner inquiry documents being about the truth that was going on behind the walls of the John Oxley Youth Detention Centre, welcome to the Heiner Affair. It has a large and increasing cast. Its plot is very simple but serious. It has become more complex in its cover-up because of its duration from 1988 to 2011. The passage of time, in fact, diminishes all of us because it remains unresolved. One major breakdown point in the Heiner affair concerns the role of the state archivist. The central law at issue is section 129 of the Criminal Code Queensland, which provides for any person who, knowing any book, document or other thing of any kind is or may be required in evidence in a judicial proceedings, wilfully destroys it or renders it illegible or undecipherable or incapable of identification with intent thereby to prevent it from being used in evidence, is guilty of a misdemeanour and is liable for imprisonment with hard labour for 3 years. Now, while the Heiner affair involves public sector record keeping, records managers working in the private sector should know that Section 129, when it speaks of any book, document or other thing, does not differentiate between the two. In short, this concerns everyone. You're all in this together. Queensland Section 129 is replicated precisely in its wording in several Commonwealth jurisdictions like Western Australia, New South Wales, Northern Territory and the Commonwealth itself, while slightly differently in the rest. But its purpose is common across all Commonwealth jurisdictions. Archives legislation cannot work in isolation to or in conflict with Section 129, otherwise the justice system will be brought into chaos. It's because of the unavoidable interface between the statutory role of record keepers and the disposal, retention, appraisal values and the discovery disclosure rules of the Supreme Court in our justice system that this affair goes to the heart of government by the rule of law. It embodies all the great democratic values, like the right to a fair trial, an independent judiciary, separation of powers, impartial law enforcement, and probity in public office. The affair takes its name from an inquiry conducted by a retired magistrate, Noel Heiner, in late 1989 into the management of a state-run John Oxley Youth Detention Centre on the outskirts of Brisbane. Certainly it involved, we know that part of this inquiry concerned the abuse of children. Certainly it involved the illegal handcuffing of children to outside fences and grates and watered grates throughout the night, and also the unresolved sexual assault of a 14-year-old Indigenous girl by other male inmates during a supervised bush outing on the 24th of May 1988. That incident has been defined as criminal paedophilia by the Queensland Crime Commission in December 2001. Now, as a public sector trade union organiser, my job was to protect my members' industrial and legal interests. My members were the centre manager and his deputy. At the time, I was unaware of these child abuse allegations. It was during my pursuit of justice after being sacked, when trying to preserve the Heiner inquiry documents, that these child abuse allegations emerged around late 1997, early 1998, and in mid-2001 in respect of the unresolved pack rape of the girl. If I hadn't struggled against injustice, none of this would be known. I later found out that this child abuse element was always known by those working in government, including members of the Queensland Cabinet, who had a general knowledge about the unresolved child abuse being in the Heiner inquiry documents when it ordered their destruction. Now, being a lawfully contracted Crown official, Heiner generated and received material which instantly attracted the legal definition of public records under the Libraries and Archives Act, under Section 5.2. This definition, in turn, entitled certain public officials to access these records pursuant to Public Service Management and Employment Regulation 65, because they also fell under the legal definition of any departmental record or file held on the officer. Now, being public records, it also meant that prior authorisation from the State Archivist pursuant to Section 55(1) of the Libraries and Archives Act was necessary before they could be lawfully destroyed. Everything was elevated when a notice of foreshadowed legal proceedings was lodged by solicitors against the Queensland Government seeking access to the Heiner inquiry documents by court order in February 1990. This is to say nothing about the other state of knowledge that existed at the same time, namely that the elected and appointed public officials involved in the shredding always knew that they were handling public records concerning the abuse of children while in the care and protection of the Crown. In short, they were handling evidence of potential serious criminality, which had the realistic likelihood of being required in judicial proceedings at a future time. In other words, these legal records attracted a range of undoubted values, appraisal values, retention values, not least being legal. The Queensland Government was placed on record by letter, phone call and meeting on the 8th, 14th, 15th, 23rd, 27th of February and the 1st of March 1990. The Queensland Government was instructed not to destroy the evidence. A more wanted set of public records has never existed. Now, into this mix, the Government of Queensland changed in December 1989 for the first time in 32 years. A new ALP government under Premier Wayne Goss, with his Chief of Staff, Kevin Rudd, took over the levers of power. It happened in the wake of the appalling revelations of corruption unearthed by the famous Fitzgerald inquiry. We were assured that the Queensland had entered a new dawn. Due process would be respected by government and no more arbitrary rule allowed. Open and accountable government had arrived, with the new impartial, all-powerful Criminal Justice Commission acting as sheriff to ensure that integrated government by the rule of law prevailed over any and all abuse of office. The Goss government summarily shut down the Heiner inquiry in late January 1990 and then secretly transferred the Heiner records to the Office of Cabinet in an attempt to gain Cabinet confidentiality. This conduct is commonly known in legal circles as warehousing. Its purpose is to defeat the discovery disclosure rules of the Supreme Court. It was made famous in the 2002 Roland McCabe versus British American Tobacco shredding case, with its infamous document retention policy in operation. We can now say with certainty that when members of the Queensland Cabinet ordered the destruction of the Heiner inquiry documents on the 5th of March 1990 to prevent their use as evidence in judicial proceedings, they and the senior bureaucrats who aided them knew that a notice of impending judicial proceedings had been served on the Queensland Government and that it was expecting a writ to be served. Crown Law advised them on the 16th of February that once the writ was served, the documents would be discoverable pursuant to the discovery disclosure rules of the Supreme Court because they did not attract Cabinet confidentiality, because they weren't created for a Cabinet purpose. And C, being public records, prior approval from the State Archivist was necessary before they could be disposed of. And D, those public records concerned the abuse of children in the care and protection of the Queensland Government. Now, what occurred between the Queensland Cabinet and the State Archivist on or about the 23rd of February 1990 is now the subject of immense global controversy and importance to best practice record keeping. In this fateful shredding February-March 1990 period, we know this. This is what occurred between the State Archivist and the Queensland Cabinet. 1. The Cabinet letter of the 23rd of February 1990 to the State Archivist did not inform her that the Queensland Government, the so-called model litigant, had been placed on notice in respect of foreshadowed judicial proceedings. Approval to shred was given by the State Archivist on the same day, on the premise that the records had no permanent value. And 3, the documents were returned to the Queensland Cabinet by the State Archivist on the same day. Now, in another part of Brisbane, on that same fateful day of the 23rd of February, as a union official, I met with the Departmental Director General. I was assured by her that the documents were safe with Crown Law. They were, in fact, being secretly appraised by the State Archivist for potential destruction because, quote, they were no longer required or pertinent to the public record, as the Cabinet Secretary said in writing to the State Archivist. We know that when the Queensland Cabinet ordered the destruction on the 5th of March, the relevant Cabinet submission said that solicitors were seeking them for foreshadowed judicial proceedings, but the writ had not yet been lodged. The documents were secretly destroyed on the 23rd of March 1990, after being collected from the Cabinet and taken back across the street to the department. They were destroyed by the same archivist who appraised them on the 23rd of February, assisted by the same Department Director General's Executive Officer, who had been told by the solicitors on the 14th of February about the court proceedings and not to destroy the evidence. What we now know is that the Crown Solicitor's advice of the 16th of February was put in the possession of the State Archivist during this fateful period. To repeat, this advice warned about discovery obligations once the expected writ was served and that the records were not covered by Cabinet confidentiality. We also know that on the 16th of May 1990, some 6 weeks after the shredding, the State Archivist was told in writing by the former centre manager that the Heiner documents were required as evidence in court proceedings. We know that the State Archivist then immediately contacted the Departmental Director General's Executive Officer, the public official who had no authority to direct her, who was told firsthand of judicial proceedings, and who had physically assisted in the secret shredding on the 23rd of March 1990. He told the State Archivist to say nothing for herself, and she complied with that direction. The overwhelming evidence shows that all the players, including Crown Law, knew that they were handling evidence required for judicial proceedings, and it was deliberately destroyed to prevent its use in those anticipated judicial proceedings. Now, I took this conduct to the new Marshal in town, the Criminal Justice Commission, in 1990. It was dismissed. It dismissed my disclosure. Most relevantly, it declared that Section 129 of the Criminal Code could only be triggered if judicial proceedings were on foot at the time of the shredding. This is what the CJC claimed in finding no wrongdoing. It claimed that all known or foreseeable evidence could be deliberately destroyed to prevent its use in court up to the very second of a writ being served. When appearing before the Senate, it also claimed that the only value the State Archivist had to take into account during the appraisal process was the historical value of a document. According to the CJC, the fact that it had legal value was none of the Archivist's business. This outraged me. It outraged the World Archives community. If correct, the CJC's view crippled Queensland's justice system by inviting wholesale destruction of evidence and made a mockery of the archives record-keeping profession. But in Queensland, because the new sheriff, the CJC, had spoken, the State Archivist and the local legal fraternity remained deathly silent. Now, we know that the State Archivist in February 1989, 1 year before the Heiner shredding approval, had issued binding guidelines concerning the disposal schedule of public records under the Libraries and Archives Act for local government public records. This definition also encapsulated state government public records like the Heiner inquiry records. These circulated guidelines, in effect whole of government guidelines, declared that a public record under sentencing had to take into account its legal value. And yet, silence reigned in Queensland while the CJC and the Queensland Government perversely twisted the law and dominated the landscape for 14 years through fear and by their own high status. My constant cry, as a lone whistleblower, of serious systemic corruption was ridiculed by them. Now, in 2004, a Baptist pastor was charged, prosecuted and found guilty for attempting to obstruct justice. His crime was to guillotine a girl's diary into recoverable strips in which she had recounted being sexually abused. His destruction of evidence act occurred some 6 years before the relevant judicial proceedings commenced against her abuser. The pastor was charged and found guilty under Section 129. Before the prosecution commenced, the pastor's counsel attempted to have the charge dropped because of the way in which Section 129 had been applied in the Heiner affair. The DPP rejected that interpretation and refused to drop the charge. Inter alia, she said that the Shredding Act was a serious assault on the administration of justice and that ignorance of the law was no excuse. Now, this is the relevant reasoning for the guilt under Section 129 adopted by the Queensland Court of Appeal in the Baptist minister case. It says this: "Now here, members of the jury, the words 'might be required,' those words mean a realistic possibility. Also, members of the jury, I direct you, there does not have to be a judicial proceedings actually on foot for a person to be guilty of this offence. There does not have to be something going on in this courtroom for someone to be guilty of this offence. If there is a realistic possibility evidence might be required in judicial proceedings, If the other elements are made out to your satisfaction, then a person can be guilty of that offence. It is beyond dispute that since 1899, when Section 129 became law in Queensland, it was never capable of the interpretation placed on it by the CJC and the Queensland Government in the Heiner affair. Neither, for that matter, was the role of the State Archivist as presented by the CJC. Retired judges advised the Queensland Government in August 2007 that Section 129 was so unambiguous that it may have been misinterpreted deliberately in the Heiner affair to advantage all the members of the Queensland Cabinet and certain senior bureaucrats. The judges recommended the appointment of a special prosecutor to investigate the affair because in its current state it undermined public confidence in the rule of law, especially equality before the law. The CJC never investigated the key role of the State Archivist. In July 2005, after the Baptist Minister case, the Crime and Misconduct Commission finally acknowledged that a prima facie breach of Section 129 existed. It declared, however, that it was not in the public interest to revisit the matter. Inter alia, it stated staleness, a staleness which was of its own making. The State Archivist's conduct, along with the conduct of all the other players in this scandal, who were either involved in the initial wrongdoing or who were later examined the allegations and found no wrongdoing, was forensically examined between 2005 and 2007 by a leading Sydney QC and lawyers and other experts in the field. This examination is commonly known as the 9-volume Rofe audit of the Heiner affair. It found some 68 prima facie criminal offences capable of being made out against all these players. This 3,000-page audit currently sits with the Senate Privileges Committee of the Australian Parliament since May of 2011. It is being concealed from public scrutiny. The Clerk of the Senate has examined it, and in her Public Advice number 47 of June of 2011, Dr. Lang advised that, inter alia, there is no doubt that the subject matter, that is the Heiner affair, is very serious. The audit contains constitutional and national interest issues of the highest order, because of whom it involves and adversely names. Pressure is being exerted for the audit to be tabled in Parliament in the national interest. By denying the Australian people their right to know what the committee and the Clerk of the Senate know, it has the potential to change the whole character of our constitutional monarchy system of government in Australia, because it turns who is accountable to whom on its head. Now, in May 2010, the Queensland Government paid the May 1988 sexual assault victim some $140,000 in compensation, with a gagging clause attached, which she later described in the Brisbane Times on the 10th of July 2010, quote, "To myself, that was yucky, dirty money to keep me quiet. That's what I mean by yucky, dirty money, to keep me hush-hush." She is due to go to Canberra by invitation of Senator Nick Xenophon in the current sitting of the Senate as I speak. She intends to confront the Greens in an effort to garner support for Senator Xenophon's move to establish a Senate inquiry into the Heiner affair. She wants to tell her story. So what does all this mean? Well, whatever view may be eventually reached concerning the State Archivist's conduct, there are certain things that are clear. Firstly, the State Archivist must not be the scapegoat. Secondly, this important whole-of-government public official in our system of government who stands at the crossroads of protecting evidence in nasty fights between the good, the bad and the ugly, must be afforded maximum protection from intimidation and fear of losing his or her job when juggling between an individual's right of either access or a fair trial, the immense power of what a cabinet may want, or what a powerful body like the CJC, when it twists the statutory role, the archivist statutory role, for a prima facie, ulterior, self-serving purpose. In my opinion, state and federal chief archivists, being whole-of-government public officials, should be afforded the same high legal status as that of the Ombudsman and Auditors General as they enjoy in the Commonwealth of Australia. That is, They should be made officers of the Parliament. This would protect them from intimidation. Any threats could be reported directly to Parliament. Any dismissal would require a bipartisan majority vote of the Parliament. I suggest that both political parties, the ALP and the Coalition, would be hard-pressed to deny this important change in the law. It should be called the Heiner Affair Amendment. It would have overwhelming public support, I believe, as sound public policy initiative when couched against the critical role that best practice record keeping plays in open and accountable democracies. The campaign perhaps could go under the banner, "No security of public records means no justice, no accountability, no democracy." Independent statutory authorities for archives must be created with their own budgets. This will allow the obtaining of their own legal advice and to institute proceedings of their own motion, if and when necessary, in matters of statutory interpretation or injunctive relief in the public interest. In the 21st century, we cannot have Crown law serving the interests of a cabinet and state archivist at one and the same time on the same matter, because their interests can radically differ. The Heiner affair demonstrates this conflict of interest in large, flashing red warning lights. Friends, I suggest that the Heiner affair is an historical gift to your profession. It now provides a unique opportunity to communicate, to collaborate and to innovate, and to demand that this mess never happens again. The system must be made fail-safe so that archivists and record managers can serve the public interest without fear or favour. In 2009, the Heiner affair has entered into Queensland education syllabus for years 11 and 12 students studying business, communications and technologies. It brings your profession into the forefront of senior students, some would-be archivists, lawyers, public servants, auditors, political and business leaders of the future. The RIM and the ASA organisations ought to do all they can to enhance this subject so that your profession is taken from the dingy back room to the prominence of the ballroom, because without best practice record keeping, our legal system and even our democracy will fail. No longer Cinderella or the frog, it's time to become the princess or the prince. The occasional shot across the bow of government on the Heiner affair, like at the beginning of the annual duck shooting season, to show the profession's displeasure at its unresolved state, in my opinion, undervalues the significance of your role in a democratic society. Given its cancerous nature on our national and Queensland body politic, infecting the highest levels of government, your profession should be constantly at the throat of government, opposition and the media to have it resolved. It's a blot on the Australian landscape. One of the world's foremost archives experts, Professor Randall Jemison of Western Washington University, USA, has just published or just declared that the Heiner affair has global implications in the May-June 11 article in Archives and Manuscripts. It's entitled "Ripples Across the Pond, the Global Implications of the Heiner Affair." In my view, Australia should be the exemplar of best practice record keeping in the world, not its counter talking point. And finally, in our global cyber village with the likes of WikiLeaks, changing and challenging citizens and governments alike about notions of openness and accountability, the archives profession should expand its own cyberspace presence. This may include the International Council on Archives creating a special space called Archives Watch or Archives Alert, and constantly embarrassing the offender come state or nations, wherever it may be on the face of the earth, to correct their wrong and to do justice according to law. Ladies and gentlemen, in my view, corruption's worst enemy is the courage and determination of just one individual to stand up against the lie and to see the truth is told. Why is this? It's because so long as one person endures, other like-minded people can rally around the cause. One can become many, many can become a tsunami. That too is the history of the Heiner affair. The archival and legal professions need to stand for the good, for the rule of law, and to be always prepared to fight against all that is bad and ugly that undermines these noble goals. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today.
We do have time for a couple of quick questions if anybody would like to ask Kevin a question. Can we have the lights up, please, guys? Oh, Barbara, do you want to walk to the mic, Barbara? Oh, Michael, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for such a fabulous accounting of the affair, which we all know so infamously from over the years. But I wondered, in the wake of the apology to the stolen generations, the Ford inquiry in Queensland, whether you think that the preconditions have